Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lana and Happy New Year. Today I will tell you about the top 5 books of my 2022 reading. Overall, I ended up reading 41 books last year and I'm pretty happy with that number. According to Goodreads, the average rating was 4 stars, which I think is a good thing. That most books I read I enjoyed, but there were very few 5 stars, and it was kind of hard choosing the top 5 because most books they were good. What I'm usually looking for in a 5-star book is that additional emotional response to a book, and for most books I read this year it was lacking, though the books were good. So I'm only doing a top 5 because even within this list of 5 books they were pretty hard to pick, although the number 1 spot is my favorite book, like 100%. I'm actually very proud of myself. I did end up reading books that have been on my TBR shelf for a while. I read some big books. The biggest book I read this year was probably Ken Follett, The Evening and the Morning, which was around 900 pages, and it was, it was great. I read The Historian, which took me so long. Finally read The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, which I actually really did enjoy, though it's not on the list of top 5. I've read some modern classics, which I've been meaning to read for a long time. So overall, I'm very happy with this year. I did the things I wanted to do, but now let's talk about the top 5. Now in the 5th spot, there is Breath by James Nestor. I learned so much from this book. I usually love nonfiction that it's kind of like, how does your body work nonfiction, and this definitely delivered. I do want to say what this book isn't. I talk a lot about Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which is another one of my favorites, not of this year, but in general favorites of all time. And this one is written by a person who's an expert in the field, who's been working in this field for I think over 20 years, and he's sharing the things that he wants the general public to know about our bodies and sleep. So it's very much, I'm an expert in this field and I'm telling you what's up. Breath is different. James Nestor is a journalist. He has had problems with breathing his whole life, and this book is sort of like his quest to understand why are we not breathing correctly anymore. So he's talking to experts and scientists in the field of breathing and anthropology and history to understand why the way humans breathe has changed so much over the course of humanity, why around 50% of Americans don't breathe through their nose, they just breathe through their mouth. What is snoring? When did people start snoring, and is it dangerous? Yes, it is very dangerous. So it's like he's going around collecting information and telling us about it, but it's definitely not going too deep. It is absolutely not academical. It's a very short book. In the beginning of this book, James Nestor and another man, they volunteer to take part in a study for 10 days. They tape their nose and they're only allowed to breathe through their mouth. And every day they record their, I don't know, bodily information, vital information, to keep track of what's happening in their bodies while they do that. And then for the next 10 days, they only are allowed to breathe through their nose. So during the night, they actually taped their mouth so they wouldn't be able to breathe through their mouth during the night. And again, recording what happens to their bodies during that process. And it was fascinating because I feel like we all know that it's better to breathe through our nose, but actually have like numerical proof of what's happening inside your body when you're not breathing through your nose is mind-boggling. Then he talks about several breathing practices from around the world. Some of those are ancient breathing practices from China and India, and he looks at the science to see if there is science behind those practices, if they actually work. But he also looks at some practices that were created by doctors and sport coaches and different people in the world who got incredible results in their patients and clients and athletes. If we're talking about sports, there's actually one breathing practice that I really want to try myself. I'm a little intimidated and scared, but I really want to do it. Number 4 on my list is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This book actually got 4 stars from me, but when looking at the list of all the books that I read, it really stood out to me. I feel like I've not stopped thinking about this book ever since I read it. If you're familiar with TJ Klune's writing, it's similar to his other books in that it is funny and quirky and light, but has deeper, important topics at its core. This particular book is about death and grief and all the different forms that it takes. We follow a terrible person, Wallace, who's a big city lawyer who dies and is brought to this little cafe in a little village to await his passage into the afterlife. Hugo, who is a ferryman to the souls and the owner of the cafe, he tells Wallace to take his time and to go through that special door into the afterlife when he is ready. And so we're with Wallace in the little village cafe, and he's pissed and confused and rude and scared because he doesn't know what's happening, and he has to come to terms with his death, and he's surrounded by these quirky characters, and it's a story about redemption. Wallace has to sort of confront the fact that he wasted a lot of time in his life on things that didn't matter, and there is a slow burn romance as well, and there's a dog which makes everything so much better. There are some laugh out loud scenes that actually did make me laugh out loud. I was listening to the audiobook on the subway, so you can imagine how that looks like, and every character is so distinct. I really feel like I know them, that they're my friends, and I kind of miss them, and this book stayed with me enough to put this on my number 4 spot in the top 5 of the year. Number 3 on my list is Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. As I said, when I'm looking for favorite books, I'm looking for that emotion, and when I saw the cover amongst all the covers of the books that I read last year, it really stood out to me because this book is so good. I read this play doing the Shakespeare Readathon vlog, which I will link down below if you want to watch it. And like, here's the thing, this is not a new book to me, but maybe, you know, it took me reading it out of the context of theater school, or maybe because I'm older, I don't know, but this book this time around hit me like a ton of bricks. It is now my favorite play of Shakespeare of all time. Julius Caesar is a play that is not actually about Julius Caesar. Yes, it has his assassination within it, but it happens pretty early on and then he vanishes. He's not even in it for that long. This is more about what he and his assassination meant to other people around him. This is a study in loyalty and honor and friendship and patriotism. It is morally gray and has a lot of incredible speeches, and I just love this book. Number 2 on my list is The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum. I don't like books about music, about, I don't know, pop singers, about rock bands. I really don't like descriptions of contemporary music for some reason. I don't know why, but I love reading about classical music. This is a mystery about Ray, who's a Black classical musician, violinist, whose heirloom violin is stolen on the eve of the biggest classical music competition in the world. Did I say that right? Though that book has that mystery of a stolen violin as its, I don't know, foundation of the plot, most of the book we're just learning about Ray and how he got to this place, how he went from playing a cheap rental violin at his high school in America to participating in the biggest, most prestigious classical music competition in the world. Racism is a very big theme in this book. It's ever present, starting with his own family. He doesn't get a lot of support and encouragement. His mother keeps telling him that no one wants to see a Black kid on stage, or that no one would even let him play because he's Black. His mother was a very difficult character to read about. Then there's the racism that is inherent to the classical music world, not being taken seriously, his talent being seen as a fluke, and so on. And it shows what a difference it made in Ray's life to have to finally find a Black teacher and mentor to guide him through the classical musical world. classical music world. Actually, the author, Brendan Slocum, is a classical musician himself, and he's a teacher, and that's something he talks about a lot in his interviews. And at the end of the book, he does have like a little letter to the reader talking about how important it is to see diversity in classical music, how for a kid like him who's Black, to not see Black musicians around really affected his confidence and stopped him from pursuing some opportunities that he might have pursued it if he felt represented. And it's important to not present the classical music world as this elitist field that only few can excel at. One of his interviews, he actually did say that 92% of Ray's experiences in the book are his own, which broke my heart. This book took me a while to read because it was hard to read so many scenes that I just felt for Ray so much. On top of things, the heirloom violin, the Stradivarius that was passed down to Ray, the descendants of the family of the man who enslaved Ray's great-grandfather, comes out of the woodwork and claims the violin, wants to claim the violin as their own property. So they're determined to take the violin from him. There's just so much in this book, and Ray is a great character to follow. I really liked him. The way music is described was very satisfying to me. It's the only way I can explain it. And though the mystery of the stolen violin is not like the biggest part of it, it was a very well done and has a very satisfying ending to it. Plus, the most prestigious classical music competition in the world that Ray is trying to take part in is in Moscow. And when I was reading, I was looking it up, trying to see if I can like grab tickets to see it, because I was reading about it and I wanted to see it. I was a little too late for that. But while I was researching, I came across the Rachmaninoff Classical Music World Competition, and it was happening right there, and I bought tickets and I got to see one of the days of the competition, the category of conductors, and it was so fascinating, especially after reading about a person training for a competition like this. I don't know, I was looking at all of these conductors from around the world who were so nervous, and I was just cheering them on. It was a lot of fun. And actually, one of the conductors that I got to see was a Chinese conductor, Haozhen Li. He got 3rd place, which is so exciting. I was so happy for him. And the #1 book on this list, the favorite book of the year, when I finished that book, I knew that it was a favorite, and it is The Bone Weaver's Orchard by Sarah Reed. In 2019, it won the Bram Stoker Award, which I had no idea that there was such an award, but it makes sense that it won because it's amazing. This is a historical gothic horror novel. On Goodreads, it is categorized as young adult, mainly because the main character is 13 years old, but it does not read like a young adult. It is set in 1926 in Yorkshire, England, in an all-boys boarding school. That boarding school used to be an ancestral family home, and before that, an abbey. So like imagine a castle. We follow Charlie, who's 13 years old, who arrives at this school from Africa, where his father is part of the colonizing British army. He recently lost his mother, and his father is going country to country and can't take him with him. So Charlie is brought to England for the very first time. He's not familiar with British education or customs and has a hard time assimilating with the other boys, and has a hard time with teachers as well. He loves insects and has like a collection of them that he brings everywhere with him, and he like really treasures them, which also makes him very not popular with the other boys. He does manages to make a friend, and soon after that friend vanishes. And so this book is kind of his quest to prove that his friend did not just vanish or leave the school, that something is happening inside the school. At night, when the boys are sleeping, he hears shuffling footsteps going down the hall into their room. It's like someone is making the rounds, and boys are disappearing. That actually triggered a memory of a nightmare, like a reoccurring nightmare that I used to have when I was young, and I completely forgot about it, and now it's like back in vivid detail. I absolutely loved Charlie. He is the sweetest boy ever. I love how he was written. he doesn't say much. He is distant and quiet. He's not used to being around kids his own age, and he doesn't really have much in common with the other boys, so he sort of keeps to himself. So we get to learn about him not so much through his inner monologue or his words, but solely on his actions. That was actually something that I was really surprised by when reading, and just how much I got to learn about Charlie solely based on what he did and not really having much to go on from his own mouth. Like, you get the description of the place where he lives, of the people around him, what they do, what they say. You don't really get much from him. You don't hear him complaining or commenting, but based on his actions you see how he feels about it, and it's so well done. Or like the friends that he makes, they like barely talk. Charlie is into insects, his friend is into rocks, and they just like hang out in silence, one is looking for insects, the other one is looking at rocks. It's like a silent companionship. But there is a scene that melted my heart. His friend got hurt and Charlie goes out, and again, you don't really get to hear his own monologue about it, but you sort of see that he is collecting rocks that he thinks his friend would like to bring to his bedside. And like, that was the moment when I understood who Charlie was as a person, and he's so sweet, but he's just so quiet. There is a lot of subtle commentary on colonialism and education. There's a scene when Charlie starts not necessarily arguing with the teacher, but telling him that, oh, where I'm from, I learned that in a different way, and that's sort of being dismissed because it's sort of like, unless the knowledge comes from civilized England, it doesn't really matter. The horror in the book really surprised me. It was just enough. I was scared and I was worried, and I had like a lot of emotions about the horror, but again, it was so well done, and the atmosphere is impeccable. There is like a scent that is connected to this book because it's described so well. It's just a masterful book. It's very short, and I want everyone to read it. So these are the top 5 books of 2022, and I'm happy with this list. Let me know if you read any of them, or if you would like to, now that you've heard about them from me. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!